This episode is brought to you by Mortgage Workflow Partners and the Mastering Encompass series, both for users as well as administrators. You can find out all the information about it over at masteringencompass.com. Also, if you'd like to check out what we're doing on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the channel using the @MasteringEncompass handle. And make sure you stay up to date on all the information, not just with podcasts, but also video content that we bring to you as often as possible. Now let's get on to the episode. Howdy, 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 everyone. Larry Bailey here, Mortgage Workflow Partners. It's Tuesday, 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern, so we're going to get together as a community. If you're watching this on replay, thanks very much. If you're listening to us on podcast, thank you very much. But head over to the Mortgage community. You can RSVP and get the link to join this Teams meeting live. The whole point of this stuff is it's a community meeting. So for those that are here, your job is to get involved. Your job is to ask questions. You've got a couple ways to ask questions. You can do the Q&A. You can do the chat over there. And yep, not Q&A. I lied. It's just chat. So you can do the chat, and you can also raise your hand if you feel comfortable enough to coming on audio only or audio and video. That's up to you. And some of your names I recognize. You guys just sat through an hour of listening to Sam Lindstrom talk from ICE. For those that were there, what'd you guys think? And I'd love to hear it. And today's topic is the art of change management, how to keep track of it all. And I can tell you, Mortgage Workflow Partners, we've got just about 30 active projects, and there's only 5 of us. So yeah, the whole art of keeping track of it all is real. And I'm going to share with you some secrets that we do, some insights that we have, some technology that we use, and hopefully you guys will take away a lot of insights. All right, so let's talk about some questions. Luba says, besides the persona access to loans rules, what else would you make a loan? What else would make a loan read only? Well, Luba, I don't know. I mean, lots of questions in context in terms of what would make a loan read only. It could be a persona access to loans, like you said. It could also be that the loan is locked somewhere else, so I would check for that. I don't know. That's a really good one. Maybe some more digging on that. If you log into the loan as yourself, is it also read only, or is it only for certain people? A lot of times when, like I had last night, there was a situation I was working with on TPO Connect, where the TPO user, some documents they were able to upload to and others they weren't. And so what I figured out was it was a role access to documents business rule, because some of the documents were set to protected doc access because someone had created the role to include for underwriter in the protected doc access role, which of course is a big no-no for most people, almost all people. And so we had to fix that. Kevin says user groups can make a loan read only. True. Maybe, yeah, definitely want to dig into that, Lou, but let us know how you make it out. Angela says the webinar was great. Love the breakdown of the where to start. And actually, so good news on that. We're actually, Mortgage Workflow Partners are going to be issuing out some guides, basically ways to use playbooks for different positions. What I'm going to be doing is basically walking you through on a smoke test loan, basically how to take that loan using entirely web, how to do that after we get our release on December 7th. Chris Lawrence, you missed the webinar that happened earlier today. We'll be talking about in the community. It was put on by ICE. I was there with Sam Lindstrom, who it's all about leveraging all the new Encompass innovations. Luba says, just nope the LO, then yeah, check the user groups. I agree with Kevin. Sounds like user groups need to be addressed. Cool. All right, so let's talk about change management, because that's what we're here for today. That's what everybody wants to know about. That's why you're spending your time, which I appreciate. How do you guys actually receive things that need to be changed? And I'm being very generic, right? Because these requests that come through from change could be coming from your own head or a team that's around you physically. or by email or by your business or by third party recommending something like an auditor or a regulator? How are you receiving these changes? So Loop is like a meeting, like physical notes, there's tickets. Jackie's got tickets. And tickets can mean a lot of different things. Maybe you're using Jira, or maybe you're using whatever, Teamwork, or you name it. Um, Jason Witt has a great answer, all the above. Angie says we use Smartsheet and we have working groups. All changes are requested through that sheet. Cool. Teams, guys, look at the chat. And I want you to appreciate your situation. And then I want you to imagine you're trying to solve for that in chat. Like, how the heck can you do all this and not lose your mind? Number one. Number two, keep track of it all. Brian's got something I've never heard of called Happy Fox. That sounds like it sounds interesting. Freshdesk, yeah, you name it. We use we use a couple different things to keep track of our tickets. Our acknowledgement of things that have to change, because we receive this information from a lot of different sources. Sometimes, like I said, we receive this by meeting. Sometimes we receive it by email. Sometimes, and that's usually the case. And so the next thing I'm going to ask you is, as you're receiving all this information, how do you really distill it? And if you don't have a plan, I'm going to tell you right now, it ends up doing the same thing that you've constantly been caught on this hamster wheel, so to speak, which is to say, something comes in, you try to do your best to manage it, to stay on top, and then you get it resolved. But then how do you track it? And a good example of this, weirdly enough, is post-closing. Has anybody gone through your post-closing team recently? Have you guys supported your post-closing team in terms of what's going on there with your workflow? If you want to find out what's happening in your company, go to your post-closing team, hands down. Post-closers always know what's going on for most companies who have to deliver loans. If your post-closers aren't delivering loans, maybe they don't know as much. But if you've got to get an investor to buy your loan, it's going to be post-closing. Second place you're going to go is compliance. Your compliance team is going to tell you what's going on in your workflow, because they got to work with the regulators and maybe some other fun folks out there to keep your loans saleable and to keep you in business as a company. And so when you meet with these companies or parts of these companies, you're getting these emails and everything else you guys are talking about in chat, you're going to want to make sure that you are tracking these in a constructive way. I don't know if you're doing this, but we'll use tagging. And so if we know that something has come up, we'll create tagging so that we can go find it very quickly. This is something that you can use with workflow rules inside of Encompass Web. By the way, with 24.3, you're going to be able to sort that. If you guys haven't caught my 24.3 walkthroughs for desktop and web, go check them out. They're out there. Encompass Web has a ton of updates. And weirdly enough, there's stuff in the Encompass Web updates that's relevant for desktop that's not in the desktop update notes. So definitely check that out. And when you're going through this is an art. Like I talk about this in the tease I gave you, the art of change management. There's an art to making sure you know what's going on, because part of what's not obvious is planning and prioritization. There's a project that right now that we got pulled in for a large TPO lender, and it's launching a new product inside of their ecosystem. And part of what we've got to do is establish, how are we going to do this without upsetting everything else? This is change management. Bad news, their changes aren't thoroughly documented in a way that's meaningful for this project. So now we're going to have to go looking for things. And so when you're going through your changes, someone mentioned Smartsheet. I found that, first of all, Smartsheet's changed over the years quite a bit, and it's gotten much more expensive. In the community, someone had posted, are you going to talk about using an Excel sheet? I don't mind an Excel sheet for tracking things, as long as in the Excel sheet you've got the following things identified. And for those that use ticketing platforms, you're familiar with this, right? You've got a unique identifier. You've got the source of the or the method of receiving the ticket. That's actually really important because it provides for context of the ticket. So you've got your unique identifier, which can be just a number. You've got your source of the ticket. You've got the person who made the request, right? Somebody made a request. And then you've got what the request is. And then off to the right, after that, now you've got some other important things. And this is where it gets different for different people. For the request, you need to make sure that you're documenting where you're making those updates. So if you've got a pattern of promotion, whether it starts in test and goes to dev, or dev goes to test, or you've got QA, or you've got UAT, or you've got, or all you've got is production. The reason why this is important is because I want you to imagine it's 12 months from now and something is going sideways. You're going to go back to this resource and see what happened. If the only way you're trying to figure out what happened in your Encompass right now is going to the system audit trail, you're in trouble. How do I know this firsthand? Because we're the company that you call to go help you out of the mess that you're in because somebody else did something in your system and you can't figure out what they did. That's a problem. It's a problem. And so when you're documenting what's changing, you have to track it. You just have to. A couple of comments that came over while I was carrying on was Candace says they put all communication. It's related, and that's good if that supports it. If you're using Excel, sometimes that can be hard. So a lot of times with an Excel format, just like you use with Smartsheet, you have to use cross-reference tables. So whether it's a ticket ID or whether it's a link, like I use Basecamp, right? So we do a lot of links to the Basecamp because that's where all the work's doing, but we still want the ticket to be referenced to that. Smartsheet, you can insert images and attachments. You can do the same thing. I know, I don't know if they're on here, but Kristen does OneNote for everything, and they put links and everything in there. Guys, whatever you're doing, make sure that you're always capturing the collateral for what's going into that ticket. Comment on here, let's see, for projects, Lubis says, oh, okay, Jason uses Freshdesk and puts links, that's great. Luba's got started listing a column for test and prod. Luba, good move. Scott says we've always used track with Excel. We had to switch IT tickets. SharePoint system is to mirror that. So keep the comments going. I don't want to keep reading what I'm sure you guys can read on your own. When you've got this down and you've got these tickets coming in, one of the things that, again, it furthers this art of change management is to understand the planning. True show of hands, or add it to the chat, whatever you want to do. Who's doing true release management? Meaning that you've got this book of changes that are happening and you're like, okay, today's the 19th. We're going to release the following changes on Monday, the 25th. Or are you just kind of fixing stuff as you go based upon what came in or what could be released? Chances are you're just doing what you can as it goes, because that's how your capacity runs. That could be okay, but what it doesn't allow for is good communication to your teams as far as what is changing. And so where Candace puts in the chat, like fixing on the fly unless it's a major new addition, guys, I can tell you that one of the biggest problems that I see when it comes to change management is making sure people are properly trained for the change. If you're not training for the change, even if it's super small, it's never going to be trained for. And I want you to take this one little change that's never trained for and then stack that up to all the other things that you're changing over the next year, 2 years, 4 years. And all of a sudden now, because nothing has been tracked along and nobody's been updated with what's changed, it's all word of mouth. So how do you deal with this? Some companies will take all these notes, all we're doing tracking, and they'll literally just screenshot or add it to an email and say, this is what changed last month. Or, this is what we changed last quarter. Whatever the case is, you'd be surprised how many people don't know what you changed, even if you thought somebody was going to train them, or even if you thought somebody was going to tell them. It doesn't happen. And so Luba says, well, no one reads it. there's a point where it's not your fault for people not reading, as long as you put it in there. So the idea, by the way, Visual Analyzer doesn't document everything, Brian, so please don't rely upon that as your source of change management at all. No third-party tool is doing that. None. So I'm not picking on Lender Toolkit. Nikolai's tool is great. It's done a great job over the last 10, 12 years, but it's not a change management platform. Neither is Kenzie Mays, neither is Awesome Technologies Inc. or anybody else out there. I'm not picking on any one company, but that your technology is not your flow. Your workflow comes first. Then you worry about technology. So let's talk about that strategy, right? And so you've done this planning, you've got the tickets, you're fixing stuff as you go, you're trying to track it as best as you can, whether you're by yourself or with a team, and you're trying to plan this out for when things can happen. Now, what's your strategy? I'm guessing from what everybody's talking about, strategy is a secondary thought, right? And a strategy could be something as simple as, who do I know in my workflow or in my business that's going to be affected by this change? Sometimes when things happen, when team A makes a change request, and you're like, oh, that totally makes sense, it affects team B and C or D, right? And the idea is, when you're going through your change management, you want to understand, why are we making these changes? I can't tell you how many times when we go through and do a workflow review, and I ask the admins of why settings exist and why things happened, they can't tell me other than because the business asked. And I'm encouraging you, as a proficient administrator of your own system, if you don't know why the business is making a change request, you should stop. And you should actually ask them, why do we need this change? For those that have been with me in like meetings, or even if I've worked for you as a consultant, you know I'm really good at asking why. And the reason why I'm asking why is because sometimes people don't even know why they're asking for it. It could be for some new team that came on and they're like, well, my other company, we did this. And I don't know why they talk that way, but that's the way they talk. And so you go through and you want to make sure you have a strategy for why you're doing this. Case in point is the webinar I just did earlier today with ICE was all about taking advantage of the new Encompass tools and workflows, things like that. And so if you're going to use Scheduler, I don't know, is Candace on here? Candace, you had some really good questions. Luba, you had some great questions on there. Angela, you had some good stuff on there. And I'm sure there were others. But the idea is, why do we want to make this change? What is our strategy? Jason calls out, he instituted a change control committee. Managers across the company attended the weigh-in on change requests. I think that's cool, because it gives an idea of the weight of the change and the strategy of the change and what's it going to do for the business. Again, just before this meeting, like minutes before this meeting started, we're working with a client to bring on non-QM. Now think about that change. A company that's never done non-QM, now they want to go non-QM. Everybody's light bulb should be going off right now of everything that's got to happen, right? You've got programs, you've got business rules, you've got calculations, you've got Mavent, you've got closing docs, you've got anything else, you've got ways of delivering those loans to certain underwriters, perhaps, because not everybody's qualified to underwrite a non-QM loan, blah, 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 all this stuff. So what's the strategy of delivering that solution, that change request? That's the art. That's the art that we're talking about here. Hopefully this is landing home for you and making some sense. Next on my list after strategy, after you figured this thing out, is to actually deploy. And again, for everybody that's on here, there's like 30 some odd people on here, right? It's 29 other people besides me. And for those that are watching, I'm sure this is for you too. Deployment is a wonderful idea when you have time that most of us don't usually have. We usually have deadlines. And so when we're focusing on things that have got to get fixed, especially if somebody's got a file in closing and they can't close it, or Luba's got a file that's view only, and she's like, what the heck is going on? Like, nobody else is having this problem. Why all of a sudden am I having this problem? Deployment might be like now, right? But it could also be something that you intentionally pause and wait. Show of hands, has anybody ever had the business ask you to make a change to something at the end of the month? And you go and do it because they asked for it. Next thing you know, you're getting screamed at because some other things are happening that were unexpected. And it's, oh, by the way, it's end of the month, right? Right? We've all been there. If you haven't been there, kudos to you. You'll be there sooner or later. And it's a horrible feeling, and it stresses you out and all this other stuff. So the takeaway from this is when you go to deploy these changes, that's part of your change management process. It isn't good enough to say we made this change, or we're going to make this change, and here's where it came in. You got to also document on that tracking log when it happened. Do not rely upon the technology to give something to you. Guess what doesn't exist after the 999th day, assuming you listened to me and where I told you to update your system audit trail? That change of that business rule doesn't exist on the 1000th day in your reporting in your system audit trail because it's gone. I got news for you. We got 7 years. Anybody can come back on your loans for 7 years to find out why something happened. Not that it happens often, but it could. So that's well beyond 999 days. And that's why you always want to put a deployment date for what happened. When we are in Friday, I'm doing in a couple of days here, we're doing a webinar on, I built an AI engine exclusively for Encompass. It's called Mastering Encompass AI Helper. And within there is material and references that go back all the way to version 18, really, because there's things that have been deployed since version 18 that are still current. That's when they were deployed, and that's what we still use. So that's why, the AI engine will look for that information because that's the most recent on that topic. The idea here is that when you go through all of this work to make sure you know what's going on, put your deployment date on there that it went live. And if you end up having to redeploy, my suggestion is always take that as another change management topic. Don't just update the deployment date for the thing that you did. That's gone. That's out the door. If there's another change as a result of that, that's a new line item. It's a new event. So I'll leave that there. Hopefully, again, this is making sense. Last thing I'll talk about is a help desk. And the art of change management, again, whether you have a help desk or not, help desk is an amorphous term. It could be a group of folks that do like level 1 support. It could be something more intense for you. But the reason why I'm bringing up a help desk outside of an Encompass administration team is because a lot of times you might have somebody in between you and the user that is creating some sense of a telephone game of what's happening. You might not consider managers a help desk, but if they're in the middle between the user problem and you, technically it's a help desk. They're trying to troubleshoot issues before they get to you. And the reason why this is an important concept here is because if you're hearing about a problem from somebody other than the actual person, and it's not an obvious thing that you can address, if it requires more discussion, if you know that if you can get a hold of the person who's actually experiencing the issue, please do that. It's one of the things that, again, when we get involved in projects, like I explained earlier, we'll hear from managers, we'll hear from owners, that kind of a thing, and I'll say, well, who's having the problem? And they'll say Johnny or Sally, and I'm like, all right, how do I get a hold of Johnny or Sally? And the reason why is because I want to speak to the person having the problem, because sometimes it's training, it's a training issue. Secondly, if it is a setting like Luba's issue was at the beginning of this call, we need to know which person is having the problem so we can start to do the research to back into the issue. As I related to earlier, as I described earlier in the call, when I discovered this role access to documents business rule issue for this TPOC problem, I went into the loan. I said, which loan is an example of having a problem? And I was able to figure out, working backwards into the problem, it was a role access to documents business rule problem, and I unwound it, and now we're fixed. So the idea is get the information firsthand. Do not, if you can help it, do not rely upon secondhand information or filtered information, because it is extraordinarily rare that you get 100% acuity on the problem if it's passed through any filters. So Luba says sometimes it's better to speak with the user. Sometimes they type in a help ticket. It's not what they mean. I couldn't agree with you more. And so I get this a lot with borrowers. Again, I don't know if you get to call your borrowers when they're having problems with whatever you're working with, having them interact with your loan file on a website. But every time I get a hold of a borrower, first of all, it's super cool because I miss talking to borrowers because I did that for so long. Secondly, it's a way to find out what's really happening. And it's a way for you to learn as an administrator for how you can go back to the beginning here of the list that I went through and actually start to figure out how you can make effective changes in what you're doing and how you're delivering your work to make it easier for everybody interacting with it. And so, yeah, speaking directly to folks who are having the problem, I advocate for always. So just to kind of go through again from a ticketing platform, what I've found over the years that work hands down. If you're using some of these, great. If you're finding that you're using technology that is just a pain in the butt, but it's what your company forces you to use, investigate how to use that technology to not be a pain in the butt. Some of this stuff is extraordinarily complex. Sometimes you can unwind the complexities by paring down what you're actually leveraging. So for us that are tracking change management, Excel, everybody has. If you're using Excel, please create an original document, assuming you've got Office 365. Share either a view-only link to the managers or to those that need to see it. I find that giving transparency to what's happening in the change management log is actually helpful because people can see what's going on live, and make sure only specific people can edit it. That's the first thing if you're using Excel. And if you're using, I saw Monday come up on the chat, and I saw some, we got Jira, Help Desk, Freshdesk. I use Basecamp. There's a million ways to manage, like ticketing issues and things like that. Whatever you're using, make sure you're staying consistent and making sure that it's just searchable. So whatever that means to you. In my case, it's using tags or using key phrases within the task, or if we're using cases as an example, if we open up a case with ICE, we'll always put the case number back in Basecamp, so that all I have to do is put the case number in Basecamp, regardless for which client it is, and we can see clearly whose ticket it is and how we're being helpful in that experience. Make sure that you're going through and you're planning your updates. Again, it's very easy just to kind of go through tick, 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 just like a user does, a team member does in a checklist, a task checklist, right? They just go tick, 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 tick. Super easy. And it's also an opportunity for making sure that you're not understanding the context and you're not providing planning. So make sure you provide the planning for the things that you're fixing. And at the very least, once a month, I'm telling you right now. So like October, look at everything that you've done in your log, push that out to the management group and say, hey gang, by the way, this is what we changed in Encompass in October. FYI, just in case you didn't know what we did, this is what we've done. This will not only give everybody constructive notice for what happened, but it also feels good sometimes, especially if you handled a bunch of tickets in there and a bunch of hard work. It feels good to really express yourself and to say, listen, we busted our butts. Here's what we did. Make sure that when you do that stuff, though, you've got a strategy behind. So if you're a multi-channel company, meaning you've got retail and non-retail, maybe there's multiple channels of non-retail, make sure you've got an idea of how each of these changes impacts the others and spell that out. There's a tactical report method that you can use where it's literally just a PowerPoint. And I did this when I used to work at American Financial Resources. Every week we did a tactical report to the board of directors, and we described in our Encompass platforms, we had 5 different Encompass instances we had to support. We used Smartsheet. That's what we used at the time. And this was back when Smartsheet was pretty dumb. It was just an online shareable spreadsheet, really, that you could put attachments into. And it was totally kick-ass. It went really well, and it served our purposes perfectly. But we had a strategy of which tasks we were finishing based upon what needed to be done. We talked about it as a group. Somebody said they had a change committee. Who is that? Justin Sorry, Jason, pardon me, Jason did it. Um, and I appreciate that. And then the last two things, of course, are getting deployed and then talking directly to the people who are affected by these changes. I think if you put all of that together, hopefully today's been helpful for you to get some good ideas, get some good takeaways for what can be helpful. And I'd love to hear your feedback if any of this stuff actually changed the way you do things. I'd love to hear your stories. Hopefully they're successful. But if something failed, I'd always like to hear that too, to see how we can give you ideas to make it better. Guys, thanks for coming. That's it for today's episode of Art of Change Management. And look, hopefully, if you can make Friday's meeting where I'm unveiling the Mastering Compass AI Helper, we can see what that's all about. And hopefully that can help you out even more. So you guys have a great rest of your day. Peace out. Be well. Thanks. Bye.